When people hear the word Destiny, they either react like this.
Your game sucks!
And this is what we get. We get this, and this, and this.
Destiny? These guys made this! And now they give me this?
Or they react like this.
Destiny!
Whether you love it or you hate it, it's obvious that the game has a large and dedicated fan base, and despite its many controversies, it continues to be one of the most popular franchises in all of gaming. Destiny was announced in February of 2013 and later showcased at that year's E3. I didn't have much interest in Destiny when it was announced, but I was definitely in the minority as everybody I knew were excited and hyped for another Bungie game. Now for context, I grew up playing Halo at friends' houses or at my cousins on occasion, but I never really got into the games like a lot of my friends. I've come to appreciate the Halo games though, as I've researched and learned more about the series and watched a lot of the Act-Man. But just know that my excitement for Destiny was low as I hadn't been a long-time fan of Bungie games. When Destiny finally released in September 2014 and was receiving such negative reception, I was a little shocked that so many people seemed to hate the game. From what I'd seen and to my own surprise, I thought the game looked pretty fun and something I would enjoy despite it looking similar to Halo. But everywhere I looked online, people were so pissed off with the game that I stayed away for a bit. If it weren't for my 3 friends who constantly kept saying, "Bro, why don't you have Destiny yet? What are you still playing Call of Duty for? What are you, 10 years old?" Then I would have missed out on what I consider some of my favorite moments I've ever had in gaming. Since Vanilla Destiny 1, I have almost 3,000 hours in the franchise, and the fun I've had with my friends throughout those years since Vanilla were unforgettable. While many fans are glad the game today isn't anything like Vanilla Destiny 1, other Destiny fans look back at Vanilla with such fondness and nostalgia. Some will claim that Vanilla was Destiny at its best, and others claim it to be when it was at its worst. So today I'm on a mission to go back in time and see if Vanilla Destiny 1 was as good or as bad as we remember it to be. There's always a lot of excitement when playing through a story for the first time in a video game. BioShock Infinite, The Last of Us, The Witcher 3, all games with incredible stories that can only be experienced for the very first time, once. Of course, these game stories are enjoyable to play through multiple times, but you can't re-experience that first playthrough. A lot of people had high hopes for Destiny's storytelling, characters and plots they'd fall in love with and want to re-experience again and again like they did with Halo. But sadly, that wasn't the case for Destiny, and by the end of the story, most gamers were left thinking,
What? What the fuck?
Now don't get me wrong, Destiny does in fact have some of the greatest stories and mysteries in any fictional universe. The amount of lore and depth this game has is mind-blowing, and I highly recommend that if you're into the story of Destiny at all, go ahead and watch some lore videos on YouTube. There's some great Destiny lore channels out there if you really want to get the most out of your Destiny experience. But as for the in-game story, it suffered severely, paired with some awful mission structure. After replaying the story missions, you realize how bland and boring each mission was in its design. Defending Dinklebot from waves of enemies while he opened doors isn't exactly exciting. But there were other things that kept me and many others playing after the story campaign. Leveling and progression in Vanilla were pretty straightforward in a lot of ways. Your character level goes up by gaining XP, just like most games, and it could be done through just about anything in the game. Weapons and armor had attack and defense values to show that your character was getting stronger. Leveling your character's subclass took time but was easy to understand and was fully customizable. But when progression began to make no sense was when you hit the level cap of 20. Most players were level 20 or nearing it by the end of the campaign, and to level up past that required you to wear gear that had light on it. Farming for armor that had light was the next step once you hit the cap, and this meant running weekly and nightfall strikes, hitting up the loot cave, doing Crucible or higher level story missions, or you could simply buy armor from vendors in the tower. But all legendary gear from these sources would cap at light level 27, and the only gear that allowed you to get to the light level cap of 30 was acquired from the Raid, Iron Banner, or if it was an exotic armor piece. This will always be remembered as the Forever 29 era because so many Guardians were just one gear piece short of hitting level 30 and RNG wouldn't be on their side. Not to mention that light level had such an impact on the gameplay. For instance, somebody who was a level 29 did 30% less damage than someone who was a level 30, and a level 28 would do 40%, 27, 50%, and so on. This system added another problem in that every Guardian would look the exact same, since everyone had to wear raid gear to be their highest level. So everybody had raid gear on, therefore there was no diversity in gear and everybody looked the exact same. Many people never got to 30 until the release of Dark Below. Needless to say, this leveling and gear progression system had many problems and would continue to stay this way throughout the entirety of Year 1, although slightly improved with the Etheric Light in the House of Wolves. I think it's fair to say vanilla leveling was far more inferior than the system we have now, although feeling like a god amongst peasants when you were the only level 30 in the tower was pretty cool. I'd argue that this was the #1 most important aspect of the game, as I think it's the main driving force into its popularity and longevity.
So, there will be a ton of loot!
Without the loot grind, meaningful rewards, or gear that made you feel powerful, then you get what became Destiny 2 at launch. A game that handed out exotics for doing nothing, legendary gear and weapons with boring and uninspired perks for the sake of balance. Vanilla Destiny, though, was made famous by highly sought after, god tier, and basically overpowered weapons and armor. Icebreaker, Last Word, Vex Mythoclast, Fatebringer, Gallahorn. These weapons are what made people return every week for another raid completion, another nightfall, and it's what kept them farming heroic strikes, or anything in the game just for a chance at some of the most powerful rewards. Nothing can compare to the excitement of loot during vanilla.
Mythoclast!
Everybody alive
No!
and doing damage.
Oh my god, it happened!
RNG was brutal, and these weapons weren't easy to come by, but it's what kept us playing. Something a lot of hardcore players went for during the first year was collecting every exotic in the game, or every raid weapon, or full armor set. Doing so wouldn't give you triumphs, or a title below your name, it just gave you one of the best feelings of accomplishment that you had a full raid set, or that you had every exotic weapon in the game. There's a good reason why people shot into caves for so many hours, days on end. Destiny is described as a persistent, open-world, always online, first-person shooter with MMO elements and a sci-fi fantasy setting. That's a mouthful, but Bungie has explicitly referred it to simply a shared world shooter. A supposed new genre of games fitting for titles like The Division and Anthem. Before Destiny's release, many thought of Destiny as Borderlands meets Halo. Borderlands being a popular cooperative looter shooter, and it seemed Destiny was to have many similarities and take inspiration from that franchise. And to an extent it does. Like Borderlands, Destiny is a looter shooter at its core, a game where completing various activities rewards you with loot. A simple concept that is complemented so well by its gameplay. Whether you're a fan of Destiny or you hate Destiny, I think everybody can agree that Destiny feels great to play. The core gunplay, the supers, the abilities, and the mobility and fluidity of its gameplay is unmatched, and it's the best in the industry right now, in my opinion personally. There was also a sense of mastery and depth in Destiny's gameplay in both PvE and PvP. The possible builds with specific classes and subclasses, paired with certain exotic armor or weapons, added depth and unique playstyles. The Titan, Hunter, and Warlock all felt different to play, and each had their own strengths and weaknesses. Not to mention the crazy things people were able to pull off by simply mastering their characters' abilities and other gameplay elements. From Titan and Warlock skating, sparrow flying, to soloing raid bosses and nightfalls, or speedrunning raids and nightfalls, Destiny players have never ceased to amaze. So we talked about how the story mission structure was garbage in this game, but how were the other activities? The raids, the strikes, the PvP, the open world. First off, let's talk about the open world and public events and patrol. One of Destiny's main selling points and a huge part of its marketing was coming across other players in the open world and defeating world bosses or completing activities together.
Another fire team coming in!
First showcased in Destiny's E3 demo back in 2013 was the Fallen Walker Tank public event. This idea I think sold Destiny for a lot of gamers, but did it live up to expectations? Not really. Initially doing Fallen Walker on Earth, defending confluxes on Venus, or doing other worldly activities with random guardians or your fire team was exciting, but the charm of public events quickly wore off due to public event being trash and the event themselves not being unique or different enough from each other that they all kind of felt the same. I think it's pretty safe to say that patrol and public events were a bit of a letdown in vanilla. The open world kind of sucked. The activity you replayed the most though in vanilla was strikes. Whether Nightfall or Heroic, strikes were your main source of leveling past 20 and one of the best ways to get exotics and legendaries. The 5 strikes in the game that it launched with were pretty straightforward and without any real mechanics involved. They mostly consisted of bullet sponge bosses with a ground slam ability. But each felt unique enough and were iconic for one reason or another. Strikes that when you say their name you know what they're famous for. Valis Taric, the tankiest SOB in the entire universe. Or the Nexus. You think about the challenging servitors in the beginning, the cool boss arena in the cheese spots. Fogoth, because he was super replayable and fun to speedrun, and Suffix Prime for its difficulty. Strikes in Destiny would continue to be a huge part of the experience, and they got better throughout time and expansions, and they're some of my favorite activities to do in the game now. Moving on to the PvP. Vanilla Destiny's PvP was some of the most fun I've ever had in any FPS game. Full of imbalances, sure, but it felt incredible to play. PvP during vanilla is revered as some of its best, in part due to it being new and fresh, as nobody was a master yet and everybody was learning and getting better at the exact same time. It was a very simplistic design and extremely addictive thanks to the fluid and crispy gunplay Destiny had. 6v6 was always fun, especially with friends. My clan and I would clear a raid, then all 6 of us would hop into Crucible together and just destroy teams. 3v3 skirmish was fun as well, and was competitive enough if you were looking for a less chaotic game type. Skirmish was also used for those in the competitive scene and tournament play. People went to great lengths in Destiny 1 to matchmake for tournament play before private matches existed, and the community is basically responsible for creating the game's competitive scene. I'll always have a love-hate relationship with the PvP in Destiny, and it's still fun in Destiny 2, but only after the Forsaken update when they reverted all changes to make it more like Destiny 1. But nothing will compare to Destiny 1 itself PvP, and most specifically the vanilla Destiny PvP was the best. The Vault of Glass, the game's only raid during vanilla. I'd argue that if any one thing kept Destiny alive and gave its fans hope for the future of the franchise, it was the Vault of Glass. Many Destiny fans' favorite memories with the game come from the Vault of Glass, and for good reason. A raid-like experience traditionally found only in MMOs that wasn't really ever experienced on console, as well as Destiny being the first FPS game to feature a raid-like experience, was a big deal, and it made sense why it was so popular. The mechanics found in VoG are far simpler than the mechanics in the raids that have come out in recent years, King's Fall and Last Wish to name the most complex, but for VoG being the first raid in the franchise, it was incredibly impressive. Each encounter was memorable, from opening the door to the vault, to fighting the Templar, to navigating the Gorgon maze, and of course, defeating Atheon.
Come on! Yes! Yes! Oh my God, yes! Woo!
Many attempted the raid, but only few prevailed. The world's first team took 14 hours to complete it, but for many Destiny players like myself, it would take weeks or months to finally clear it. Vault of Glass was an elusive and exciting adventure to take part in, and not everyone had what it took to beat it at the time. But whether you beat it or not, Vault of Glass was something special. If you hadn't beaten it, or had only beat it once or twice, when you saw a Guardian with Chatterwhite in the tower, you knew he was a legend. But when you saw a level 30, you knew he was a god. And lastly, the community. The Destiny community is one of the best to be a part of in gaming. Now, it's not without its toxic members, of course, but it houses some of the most helpful, dedicated, and talented members in all of the video game communities put together. Arguably, the community is what held this game together in vanilla, and it's what still is keeping the game alive today. I'd have to say that if my clan members quit completely, it wouldn't be long before I left the game too. During Destiny 2's launch, that almost happened, and I'm glad things have turned around and allowed Destiny to live a bit longer. So many sub-communities have popped up and exist in this game, from speedrunners and raiders, PvP sweats and completionists, to lore lovers and artists. Destiny is home to so many different kinds of players. In my experience, members of the community and my clan members offer help to each other of any kind, whether it's completing raids, quests, offering tips, or anything else. The community is always there and willing to help. Not to mention outside of the game, Destiny charity events and streams raise insane amounts of money, all thanks to the awesome members of the community. Destiny will always be an incredible game, flawed absolutely, but one of a kind. Destiny has been more than a game for so many, and I hope it will continue to stay that way. It's crazy to think of where the franchise is now, and the experiences we've had and the things we've done since vanilla. To sum it up, I think Badass Gaming said it best when he said this:
Destiny's not about the story. It's not about the multiplayer. It's not about the missions or the strikes or the raids or even the loot you chase after and never get until you buy some hand-me-downs from Zerg. It's not even about all the flaws people love to mention or constantly complain about. Destiny's about the experiences and the fun you're about to have with your friends while doing all those different things and more.
So what do you guys think? Was vanilla Destiny one of your favorite times in the game's history, or did you quit Destiny and come back after expansions or the sequel? I'd love to know, so leave your thoughts on the video and any opinions of Destiny in the comments below. I'd like to thank you again for watching the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.